the government's position. In your portfolio, of course, you must be very aware that farmers are still extremely upset about the way Labor has handled this whole saga. Is there any progress at all, or is there still a bit of a standstill on this issue?
Well, actually, this has been a process that's involved the independent authority putting forward some information that it's at the beginning of a long process that they are engaged in. The government, of course, is very observant of what's going on and concerned about the issues that affect our rural communities. But it's not just a simple question of the environment or agriculture. The two do relate to each other. We know that environmental flows have a big impact, for example, on the situation of the salinity and acidification in the lower lakes, which has devastated dairy farming down there. Healthy estuaries are very important for our fishing industry, and of course environmental flows do have a huge impact on the tourism industry right through the Murray-Darling Basin. So there are lots of economic interests that are at stake with this. We have achieved some great outcomes that I've personally observed from the environmental water applications, which have boosted tourism in areas like the Hattah Lakes. But we do have to make sure that we are focusing on making sure that our farmers can survive in dry conditions, looking towards efficiencies and productivity outcomes there to contribute to restoring health to the rivers at the same time. It's a difficult challenge, but it is very important that we get the balance right. At the end of the day, what the objective is to achieve sustainable extraction limits. How we get there is open to debate.
Mitch Fifield, we saw over the weekend Barnaby Joyce warned that Tony Windsor could be the government's fall guy when it comes to water because he's head of that parliamentary committee. After he sided with Labor, though, just after the election, do you really care if that is how it works out?
Well, Tony Windsor's a pretty canny guy, and I think he can probably look after himself fairly well. But Barnaby does raise the question, what really is the purpose of this parliamentary committee that Tony Windsor's chairing? It's essentially a piece of window dressing to cover up for that which the government hasn't done, and that is to look seriously at the economic effects of a Murray Water Basin plan, the one which we've seen presented in recent weeks. This is a bizarre situation. We've essentially got Tony Burke being the Forrest Gump of water policy in Australia, just randomly stumbling through the scene, saying that this report from the Murray-Darling Basin Commission really is nothing to do with him, that he's just a disinterested observer. This government has comprehensively mishandled the Murray-Darling Basin plan process. We've seen them mishandle the mining tax process. We've seen them mishandle the ETS. We're going to see them mishandle the carbon tax process. We've seen them mishandle investing the Building Education Revolution program. We've seen them mishandling roofing insulation. Whatever this government touches ends up being a disaster.
But Mitch Fifield, that attack on Tony Burke, Mitch, do you acknowledge, though, that the independence of that Murray-Darling Basin Authority is something the government is trying to keep in play here? And isn't that exactly what the Howard government imagined when it first set it up in the first place?
Well, it is an independent body, but that shouldn't prevent the government of the day from actually putting a view that, for instance, the economic ramifications of the plan as presented would be disastrous. We haven't heard the government say that. We haven't heard the government actually say, we're going to stand up for and we're going to fight for those who are on the land. We're going to fight to make sure that there's a proper balance between the environment and water use for agriculture. We haven't heard Tony Burke make that claim. He went missing in action after the report was released. He hasn't visited any of the potentially affected communities, and we've seen Simon Crean have to step in and in effect become the de facto water minister.
Well, Mike Kelly, we know that you represent, of course, the regional area. Have you been hearing that the job losses are going to be far beyond the 800 or so that were mentioned in that draft report we saw a couple of weeks ago?
Well, certainly we just need to remind ourselves that this is a process the Howard government did establish, but they weren't able to nail down the deal that we did to actually get the investment in not only environmental purchases, but investment in infrastructure efficiencies both on and off farm. $5.8 billion is going in that direction, working through the states to achieve that. Tony Burke, as the Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestries Minister, prior to picking up this appointment, travelled extensively through the Murray-Darling Basin, as well and truly truly aware of all of these issues and is working in close conjunction with, of course, Joe Ludwig, the new Minister in Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestries. We do understand perfectly what the potential impacts on communities are of reductions in water entitlements. We want to make sure that we can firstly achieve great benefits and returns to the river through efficiencies as far as humanly possible, and then look to see what other actions may be necessary in relation to the health of the river generally. These things are being worked through very carefully. The government has made no prejudgment of where the Murray-Darling Basin Authority is going. The final plan has to be signed off on by the Minister, and with this new parliamentary committee we'll be looking at this objectively and seeing what outcomes are produced through the Murray-Darling Basin Authority's consultation.
Okay, Mike Kelly, Mitch Fifield, stay with us. After the break we're going to look at another area where the government is under fire over, and that is asylum seekers and the decision to set up 2 new detention centres in South Australia and WA. Stay with us.